Hey guys, so I'm going to do a little talk on Donald Hoffman, and I'm going to try a new approach. I've been kind of cheating a little bit in some of these talks and getting, preparatory materials and ChatGPT, and I think I've sort of lost a bit of flow because of that here and there. So I'm just going to kind of just go without aids here and just talk about kind of why Donald Hoffman appeals to me, why I think he's extremely brave, and I think he's part of an overarching sort of paradigm shift, and emphasis on the word paradigm there, because Chrissy, you've been talking about precisely what we mean by that, and so I could talk about that actually just very very briefly, because this is essentially what Hoffman is kind of going up against. We're in a materialist or physicalist paradigm in science, right? And that just means that it presupposes certain truths about the nature of things, and it presupposes that things are truly made of physical stuff or physical processes, and that's what's really going on in space-time. And we are kind of, our consciousness is an emergent epiphenomena of these complex kind of organic systems that we are supposedly. So so that's what we're dealing with. So now that paradigm of thinking permeates all sciences. So it means that in physics, for example, if you're interested, because a lot of physicists really aren't these days, but if you are interested in the fundamentals of fundamental nature of reality, then most of them probably would be materialists or physicalists. So for them, consciousness emerged from complexity in an uncaring sort of cold universe, right? Um, so neuroscientists will obviously be influenced by this, because it means that they will think that the brain is a real standalone sort of physical object in space, and that's where consciousness kind of goes on, right, inside the brain, and that's where memories and that's where our experience of the world is going on. Okay, and there's various accounts of why it's like this and so on. So really, Donald Hoffman is sticking his head above the parapet completely and utterly, right? When he's stands up and says, and he's given TED talks on this. He's been on. He's done the kind of the podcast tour. He's done them all, it seems. I think he was even on with Jordan Peterson. He was on with him. I mean, Peterson just, God, he gets on my wig. I mean, I just find his approach so unhelpful and distracting. But Hoffman did the best he could in those conditions and gave a fairly good account of himself. But yeah, so I mean, he's kind of been quite life changing for me, because it's just so refreshing to see an extremely well educated and sort of well decorated academic, extremely well cited, published, widely read, and respected. It's so exciting to see an actual scientist come out and say they're idealists. And so for him, the universe, as it appears to us, this space-time domain, is just an illusion. It's just the headset that we have. So sorry, I think illusion's the wrong word there. It's just the impression we receive with the headsets that these human bodies give us, right? So there's something more sort of fundamental than these human bodies and the physical space that we observe, and that fundamental thing for him is consciousness, right? So he's what you might call a conscious realist. So for him, consciousness is the seat of reality. Experience is all that's actually happening. And the things that are being experienced are other experiences, right? So he acknowledges, so for him, the kind of simple model of a conscious agent would be an entity that sort of receives input, contents, and can also send output, content, right? So, and so that's quite quite simply conscious agents. I think they're reducible to these kind of mathematical sort of grids of probabilistic grids or probability matrices, and that's what he calls, I think, a Markovian kernel. Would say the entity, the conscious agent, sort of only has three possible experiences: red, amber, and green, right? And that's all it can do. So, you can have a bunch of different combinations of those in different orders and so on. And that's what its Markovian kernel is. It's kind of like a probability matrix of, which experience it's going to have next, right? And and so that's fundamentally what a conscious agent is for him. And we are complex conscious agents. So I think he's saying it was some sort of compound of these smaller conscious agents. And what he wants to show is that so there's a bunch of scientists, high energy physicists, and some of them are saying that space-time is doomed. And what they mean by that is that the space-time model kind of that is presupposed really in quantum mechanics and relativity theory, this sort of 4D manifold is presupposed, right? And that's where stuff goes on. We've been doing physics like that since the beginning. And for Hoffman, he's saying that the one thing that that's really that we can be sure of is our own experience. And so space-time is just a mode of that experience. So for him, the universe is kind of in us. I know he's actually quoted as saying that, and I'm saying that, and I think it's a cool way of putting it. The universe is in us, and there are probably loads of other universes in us as well. And what I mean by that is there's loads of, there is only one. Yeah, this is something else Hoffman refers to. And I mean, the parallels here with early mysticism, Upanishads and Hermetica and so on, are just absolutely mind-boggling. So you can see that these sort of modern scientific ideas are now beginning to touch early mysticism and the insights that they gleaned from their, visions. Sort of, it was Ezekiel had sort of angelic visions, and loads of people having angelic visions in the Bible and other scriptures and so on. And I think Hermes was supposedly had one of those visions, and he was given this kind of view of reality being created, and one of the insights is that it's one big single mind. So yeah, back to these high energy physicists. They are saying that the space-time mathematics that they've been using to understand the behavior of what are called scattering amplitudes, which happen after muon collisions and things like that in particle accelerators. They're saying that the space-time mathematics, you can do it, but you end up with thousands of pages of formulae and so on. But these scattering amplitudes are these kind of pre-spatial objects that project these behaviors into space-time. And doing the math with these scattering amplitude, these amplitohedra, gets far better accuracy in the predictions of these collisions and these scattering amplitudes. So so what they're saying is that space-time isn't the way forward in terms of explaining underlying phenomena. And they're kind of saying, well, look, I know it looks like a 4D space-time realm, but that ain't how things are. And it's not going to be space-time mathematics that really get underneath what's going on. It's these new sort of pre-spatial or unspatial or non-spatial geometries called amplitohedra. And so what Hoffman wants to do is build a bridge from his theory of conscious agents and the mathematical models that he's building around that and these amplitohedra. And it turns out there are these things called decorated permutations, which I think they're a sort of matrix of sort of statuses, because we can imagine sort of a bunch of imagine a kind of like a square grid of point, and each one of those points has a kind of status, and they're various different permutations of that. And apparently some of these decorated permutations actually can be used to map into things like amplitohedra. So what he's trying to do is, from his conscious agent theory, build up some maths there, pump that into a decorated permutation, and then map that into the amplitohedra. And then that can actually then map into sort of space-time, so they can actually do experiments based on his conscious agent theory. So if he can make assertions about what will happen, he can develop a predictive model based on the behavior of conscious agents, which maps through decorated permutations, amplitahedra, and then back into space-time, and we get the empirical data that backs it up, then he's just proven something very, very strange. He's proven that at least this conscious agent theory works to predict the generation, the kind of mapping of pre-spatial entities, these amplitahedra, into space-time. And that's mad. In some sense, it's kind of proof that his conscious agent theory is correct, or at least at least it's another model that represents some underlying phenomena that maps into space-time. We can't make the same mistakes that we've made with physics for hundreds of years, where we say, we've got these electrons, and where are they? Well, we can't actually show them to you, right? They're just a theoretical construct that allows us to do the right kind of logic and mathematics and inference with phenomenal data and do predictions and so on. It doesn't mean that the electrons are actually out there. There's something that's out there that manifests as an electron in our frame of reference and our model and so on, right? But it doesn't mean there's necessarily an electron, and that's why science gets out of kilter with reason sometimes. So we don't want to make the same mistake with Hoffman. But what it is showing is that he's got some glimpse of a dynamics that don't exist in space-time, right? But they project phenomena into space-time, and the kind of the very high-level vehicle for doing that, in his mind, are these conscious agents. So these conscious agents have these experiences, and I'm presuming the phenomena that generates these experiences are just other conscious agents. So my experience is the output of agency, yeah. Whereas obviously the traditional materialistic view of it is that agency wasn't even there at the beginning of time or the beginning of the universe. Agency emerged from the complex mixing up of different elements and so on. And sort of life evolved. I mean, we accept conscious realism and idealism, which are very similar really similar things. We accept that evolution kind of happened, right? There is something that's evolving. We accept that these things that we look at, planets and so on and so forth, these are real things, right? But they're not what we necessarily think they are. It's the way we perceive a particular phenomena. So there could be some massive sort of lumbering agency there, that largely behaves in a very sort of regular fashion, i.e. it seems to follow these trajectories to do with gravity and so on and so forth. I mean, this is where I can't help but mentioning Rupert Sheldrake, because I just love him so much, and he thinks that nature behaves thus because of habit, as opposed to these fixed laws of physics, which tend to be absolute. When you're dealing with laws of physics, you say these are absolute and they will always work like this in anywhere in space-time. Whereas actually even Lee Smolin, sort of fairly cutting-edge physicist, he's worked on string theory and loop quantum gravity, he says that he envisages a kind of cosmos where the laws of physics actually evolve, right? Which would make doing physics a lot harder until we understood that the dynamic of that delta, that continuing sort of delta through the states. And so so Donald Hoffman, I love his courage. He's coming out and saying these things that sound absolutely wacky. So he's saying that consciousness is fundamental. I can't, it's hard to drill this in, and so he's saying that, I'm at the moment, right? So let's just put a practical spin on it. So I admit I'm sat on the bed, fully clothed, I should add. So the TV's ahead of me, and I'm in a room, right? And Hoffman's saying, well, no, you're not. You're saying that for him, I'm not in anything, right? I'm not inside it. My consciousness is just interacting with other consciousness. My conscious agency is interacting with other conscious agencies, and so the world around me is just the output of other conscious agencies. And some of it seems sort of it's pretty tedious, really. It's not doing, sort of this bed, for example. I mean, he's saying that that's not like a standalone object. So, if every living being on planet Earth disappeared tomorrow, so there was no perception going on around on planet Earth, he's kind of saying that really planet Earth isn't there anymore. If there's no agency around it, it's not there. Yeah, I like Donald Hoffman. I think maybe I've misinterpreted some of his ideas. I mean, I tend to try to instantly map him into the idealist frame of reference, and he and Bernardo Castro have had some quite lengthy conversations, and they do generally agree on like 99%. And I think Hoffman's even described himself as really he is an idealist thinker. He just calls it. I think he calls it conscious realism for the reputational damage to avoid the reputational damage he might incur by declaring he is an idealist. But that's what he's doing really. He's got the sort of evolutionary argument. He says that we're not meant to see. We're not evolved to see the truth. So we're only evolved to see what's necessary. And he calls it like a dashboard representation of what's really out there. And people have challenged him on this before, and they said, "Oh, if this is true, go and stand in front of a steaming train, a sort of approaching locomotive." And he says, "Look," he says, "obviously I know that will destroy Donald Hoffman, right? But what he's saying is that take your perception seriously, but don't take it literally, right? So you have to take it seriously if you want to continue in this kind of game or within this headset." But for him, once Donald Hoffman's body dies, the consciousness that's been doing Donald Hoffman moves on somewhere else, perhaps to some other headset or to some other business that conscious agents get up to. But it's probably another kind of, moved into another set of kind of headset style experiences, but it could be completely different. Different colours, dimensions, and so on. There's this interesting idea that we can model multiple dimensions in math, so we have the conceptual capability to understand extra spatial dimensions and so on, but we can't visualize it. So that's quite interesting. How did we end up being able to conceive of these extra dimensions if we can't see them? It's not based on any experience of extra dimensions. Then you might come in and say, oh, it's just a kind of an artifact of mathematics, so it's just a peculiarity. There's no such thing as the extra dimensions. But it just kind of looks like there are. In the same way you can have absurd sentences with language, right? But then, elsewhere in physics, where extra dimensions are actually postulated, and I think they can do actual empirical sort of predictions based on that, and so it seems to suggest that there is some phenomena out there that at least has been characterized as a dimension by us. Whether it's real in the sense that our sort of mathematical dimensional modelling suggests is another question. So yeah, some interesting stuff to think about there. I love Donald Hoffman. I think he's very brave coming out really as an idealist. He does get a lot of criticism. One of his criticisms, of course, is he uses evolutionary theory to argue against material reality, and some people argue that evolutionary theory is based within material reality, so he undermines himself there. I disagree. I think he's still, evolutionary theory is still just describing the behaviours of these conscious agents, right? So animals, plants, bees, butterflies, these are all just conscious agents, and that's what they appear to us as, right? Anyway, so I hope that's interesting, and that's Hoffman. What do you reckon? Bye.